Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. We have two Sreenivasans today for the price of one. Our guest is Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan. He's Sree's father. He's a former ambassador and author. Our host, of course, is Sree Sreenivasan, the son. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is going to be a special show. Sree and his father are actually in Houston this weekend. So we'll be looking at both the New York Times and the Houston Chronicle. In addition to talking about Sree's father's career, we'll also, of course, be talking about Sree's mother, Ambassador Sreenivasan's wife, who passed away in January of this year. And we'll talk about her memoirs that they released posthumously. Please make sure to let us know where you're watching from, tag a friend, share, retweet, do all the things that you're supposed to do on social media because we want everyone to be able to join us for this very special discussion. Um, without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks who are watching on the show. We have Jonathan watching from the East Village. Jonathan, always great to have you join us. We have Doug watching from Northern California, always joining us early, 5:30 a.m. Eastern time. So Sree and his father are in Houston, as I mentioned earlier, 7:30 a.m. local time. So they can't complain, really, and maybe a little bit. But Patricia Freudenberg is joining us from New York on LinkedIn. Patricia, always great to see you. Thank you. Naomi is joining us. She's saying it's a beautiful day on the Upper West Side and looking forward to a great show. Our friend Ron Thomas is joining from Dubai. Ron rushed in from a business meeting to check in. Ron, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Ken is joining us from Iowa. Um, John Laxmi is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. John, good to see you. Thank you so much for your support. John is a longtime board member for SAJA, the South Asian Journalists Association. Ted Coltman is watching from Washington, D.C. And my mom. Hi, Mom. I did actually talk to my mom, I think it was yesterday or Friday. So this isn't the first time I'm talking with her in a while. But thank you for joining, as always, from Hastings on Hudson, New York. Stephen Kaplan is joining from Ramsey, New Jersey. And we have, let's see who else. Liz Pressman is joining from the Berkshires. Good morning, good spring morning. Looking forward to today's show. And Paula Kiger is joining us from Tallahassee. Paula, always great to see you. So let's go ahead and bring on Sree to join us. Sree, welcome to the show. 1 second, Sree.
Houston.
There we go.
Hello from Houston. I am so happy to be here with all of you. And thank you, Neil, for having us on a early Sunday morning. As always, if you're new to the show, we are live from 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, where we read the Sunday New York Times or another newspaper out loud. Because I'm in Houston, we're going to be able to read both the New York Times and the Houston Chronicle and share our thoughts with you. There's a front page story about a mass shooting and its victims in Texas, but it's not the shooting from last night. That's how terrible the situation is here. There is a pointer to the story in Dallas. We had friends and family around the world calling us because they thought we were near the shooting. Texas is such a big place, of course. We are going to be talking about that. We'll talk about the coronation of King Charles. And you're going to meet my dad, who had occasion twice to meet Prince Charles before he became King Charles. And we'll be talking about my mom and the book that we published posthumously. This was her dying wish that she be able to finish this book, and she did 99%, and we pushed it over the edge and brought it home. Among other things, we'll show you is a picture of her with Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, and in the page before that, a photograph of her with President Kalam of India. So there's so much to talk about, but let me introduce you to my dad.
Hi. How are you? Good to be back on the show.
Yes, you've been on the show
Before,
before, and we've always loved having you. And you can tell he looks like my older brother, maybe. Neil, are you having?
I wanted to jump in to just say hi to your father. I was giving you the stage, Sri, but I wanted to remind everyone that I've actually known your father longer than I've known you, Ambassador. If you remember, you obviously knew my parents in New York when I was growing up, and my mom actually says welcome to you for joining the show.
Thank
But
you. Thank
I
you.
had known you before and Auntie before I met Sri at his wedding. So uh,
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining. It's always a pleasure to have you,
Same here.
whether as a guest or as a viewer.
yes, and you remember my mom was a regular viewer
Of
as
course.
well, and one of the reasons Neil started working with me on the show is that he saw I was fumbling around on Facebook trying to do this, and he jumped in and made it more professional. But his father, who you knew so well and was a newspaper publisher of News India Times, asked to have the New York Times Sunday edition in his casket.
Oh, he suggested that.
Yeah, and to have that, and so that gives me goosebumps every time I think of that, and think of him, and think of my mom. And hello, Auntie Sudha, Auntie. Thank you for watching, and we'll get started. We have so much to talk
John
about.
Laxmi is
Yeah,
also
John
saying
says
hi,
hi,
Ambassador.
Ambassador. Yeah, it's that.
Okay.
Hi, John. You're visiting New York after and the U.S. after 4 years after the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, you weren't able to come. What have you noticed about the U.S.? What do you see here? Your thoughts?
Well, except for the occasional shooting in the United States, situation seems to be calm. That is the impression I got when I came. Of course, this is a big exception of what happened now. But I heard someone saying on CNN that we must remove all the congressmen and bring new people so that this law can be changed. And that I don't think is a possibility
Yeah,
because
because of the shootings, right?
and
Yeah.
also it reflects the general situation in the country, and by removing some people, it's not going to change. So it's a psychological change is to take place in the and very strong measures to be taken. And as someone asked, why do they have to have guns? What is the purpose of having guns? But of course, it's a political issue. I should not want to talk about it. But that is the wish that all of us have everywhere else in the world. Why the United States is like this? But there are several problems. We know the war is on, all kinds of issues are there. But I found the United States calm, peaceful, working very well, and many good things are also happening.
And so you are seeing, with the shootings. I want to be careful saying no guns in Texas because somebody may have a gun here right at this moment. They can carry a gun anywhere, so you don't know what's going to happen. And this is so tragic that I saw this story about victims of a mass shooting in Texas, but this is last week's shooting, not last night's shooting. And that's how awful it is. And this is unlike anywhere in the world. Countries with a lot of crime, including India, guns are not available like this.
Absolutely.
And it's so there's so much to talk about. I see a nice note here from Naomi who says your father's grand reputation precedes his intro. And since you use the word grand, I should tell people that you did something unusual. As a grandfather, you went to see your grandkids on their college campuses. I don't know many grandfathers who do that on their own. He flew to my daughter's campus in North Carolina and my son's campus in Boston.
And spend 48 hours each with both of them. Because I have always regretted that I never went to a university in the United States, because that is something I regret. Because the atmosphere in the universities here is absolutely enchanting. And the kind of opportunities they have, I always thought that I missed that. But I am living that through my grandchildren because they have adjusted themselves to the situation so well. And can you imagine a sophomore gets 3 professors to dinner to meet me? I mean, I would not have imagined that they would have cared to come. But that is the impact she has made. And they were very excited about it. And she kept the conversation on her subject. None of us had any talk because she focused on what she wants to do and sought advice from them. And they were very pleased to do that. And similarly, I met the president of the university.
In Boston at BU, you met, yeah?
Boston University, and he spent 1 hour with us talking about education back in India. He had been there several times. In fact, he had wanted to open a campus in India, and it went through till the very end, till the University Grants Commission, which controls, regulates everything, said, no, we need to have a legislation in Parliament. And this legislation in Parliament has been pending for years. So his dream was to get this done, and so he has that determination. He's now retiring. Perhaps he'll work on this.
Well, one of the things that you worked on in India was bringing joint ventures with American universities. What's the situation in India now? As you know, NYU and other universities have campuses in Abu Dhabi, in China, and other places. What are the rules in India now?
Yes, I tried very hard to get a legislation done, at least in Kerala, about collaboration, because there is possibility of collaboration, but that's not enough, because they need to come and see situation. I even started 1 or 2 semesters for American students, and we saw the big difference, the cultural difference. A university student in India behaves very differently from a university student from here. So there are all kinds of difficulties, but we manage that. But the problem is that you need a legislation in Parliament in order to allow foreign universities to come. And that was done even by the previous government. But Mr. Modi has brought about a new education plan, education policy. It is now 2 years already. Still discussions are going on, but one of the things is to allow foreign universities to operate in India. So many universities have in fact come and purchased land in India, even without knowing whether they'll get the permission eventually. And lots of restrictions have been placed, like that they cannot take profit abroad. You have to reinvest in India. Then they have to follow all the procedures relating reservations and all that people have not heard of in universities here. With all these constraints, they are ready to come, because India is a living laboratory, for good or bad. For a university to have the experience of India is something they consider very, very important. But unfortunately, we still have some hesitations. And we hope that this new education policy will bring about, because private universities have already started. Some of the best universities in India are now private universities. You must have heard about various.
Ashoka, for example,
Yes.
very well. Yeah, I just want to point out Ron Thomas, our friend who's in Dubai, where your son and my brother, your other son and my brother lives. Says, I look at you interviewing our dad, and oh my God, I would love to have that opportunity to talk about my dad at my stage of my life. My success is his success, very inspiring, and I feel the same way about my dad and everything that he has done. He's been obviously someone who I've been able to try to learn from as much as possible. My grandfather's dream was to have him in the foreign service, and he did get in the foreign
My
service,
brother
and
too.
then his younger brother also joined the foreign service. His other 2 brothers also did fantastic had fantastic careers and very important careers. And so my grandfather thought it was we went backwards as a family when I said I wanted to be a journalist, and he said to you that you're a failure as a parent if you let. You said, don't just listen to your son. Your son shouldn't decide what he do. Because he didn't let you decide what you want to do.
That's right. I know that has been a major complaint with him. But before he passed away, he was proud of you.
Yeah.
He knew of a world which he had not known. He thought a journalist was the one who brings newspapers to the house in the morning. And he was thinking of his grandson going around distributing newspapers. So, but he came to know that it was not so, and he was very proud of you.
No, I was so happy that I got to spend time with my grandfather towards the end, and that was wonderful. And all along the way, we used to go back to. It was so important. I tell people who raise kids, multicultural kids, go back to the homeland as often as you can, because you won't get that opportunity later. Patricia says, "What's your favorite part about visiting the U.S.?" You, of course, lived here for 10 years. The only diplomat to get 3 postings in the U.S. when he had them, twice in New York and once in Washington. New York, I arrived here when I was 9. So what is your favorite part about, what's the difference between visiting and living in the U.S.?
Well, more than anything else, what fascinated me was the location that you have at the moment, next only to the UN. As I say, we can touch the UN through his window. This is a thing I had dreamt of, having an apartment next to the UN. We were, away on the east side because of the government accommodation, etc. But this was very exciting, just to wake up in the morning and look at the UN. Because the UN has been such an important part of my life 20 General Assembly sessions. I don't know how many people have done that from different places, 6 years in the UN itself, and then, Vienna, in Nairobi. And so multilateral diplomacy is in my blood. And therefore, I didn't get too many diverse postings because I kept going back to the UN in different parts, different capitals, and finally ended up in Vienna, where we have a very important mission to the Atomic Energy Agency.
And you were friends with Mohammed al-Baradei, who was insisting that Saddam did not have nuclear weapons or WMDs,
and he defied the US in the Security Council.
And he got a Nobel Prize for his efforts, but of course the war happened, and we're in Houston, where the airport is called George, I think it's the father, maybe HW. I don't know which Bush, but it's a Bush. It's named after one of the Bushes. So the airport is named after one of the Bushes. If they had, what would the world have been like if we had listened to al-Baradei at that time?
Absolutely, the second Gulf War could have been avoided. He was very, very frank and forthright. Said, we have seen everything in this country and there is nothing like that. But they didn't believe him. They actually produced false evidence of...
and the Americans did that.
Yes.
And
the Americans wanted to... You see, the father Bush did not eliminate Saddam Hussein because he thought Saddam Hussein had a binding kind of a role in Iraq. But the son Bush thought that he should be eliminated. That was the big difference.
And him and Cheney decided to...
Yes, and the UN was not with them. The UN was with them in the first Gulf War, but in the second Gulf War, the UN was not there. And part of the role was played by Mohammed al-Baradei. And the bond between us was golf. He was a beginner, and I was some kind of a guru, even though I was not a great golfer. But he thought I was magical, I'm able to hit the ball which he would not. But then, in 3 years, he became a golfer. Now he regrets that he doesn't play anymore since I left.
So what are we looking at on the screen right now?
Yes, this is, of course, these are two different pictures. But I interviewed him on my own television show, YouTube show. My 100th episode was done by him. As a Nobel Prize winner, he was a big draw. Maybe that was the most...
watched
television program that I ever made. It was so charming and he was so friendly, and he, in spite of all the differences we had with the main IAEA, because IAEA concentrates on safeguards, while we believe that it should be a promotional agency promoting peaceful use of nuclear energy. But the focus is too much on safeguards, and therefore we had many problems, particularly when we tested in 1998. But he steered the whole thing so well because he understood the logic of India's nuclear weapons. But he wouldn't, of course, defend it. He would always want India not to have nuclear weapons. But he handled the situation so well that I was able to survive in Vienna as the, having defied the NPT. But now things are different. We have an arrangement with the entire world that our nuclear capability is entirely for peaceful purposes. And so it's a different world now. But he played a very big role in that. And every Sunday we played golf. Other ambassadors were waiting for an appointment with him, but I never sought an appointment.
You didn't need to.
Every Sunday we met and we finished all our business on the golf course while hitting the balls. That is a fantastic opportunity.
I see one of the things about the show, as you know, when you do live television like this, is that you get feedback right away. And Shilpi is pointing out that it is indeed George H.W. Bush Airport, so named after the father. And we have so much to talk about, folks. That's my dad. We're in Houston, and we're about to look at the Houston Chronicle as well as the New York Times. And I thought, since we're in Houston, we should look at the paper. Now, in India, you get multiple newspapers in multiple languages every day at home. What is so special about a newspaper in print versus seeing one online?
Yes, I belong to the old generation. I cannot live without holding a newspaper in my hand in the morning. That's not true, but it's all accessible. But the point is, when you get a printed newspaper in your hand, you not only have the interest to see everything, but also a duty because you are paying for it. So if you don't read a newspaper in a day, it's a waste of money. So we are all very addicted to newspaper reading. Of course, we go to the net to read New York Times or other newspapers, but not with the same kind of intensity as we do an Indian newspaper. And international coverage is very good. in Indian newspapers because we still care a lot about the world. I would think that, American television, there's so much of internal news, unless, of course, it is CNN International. But when you see a regular CNN, you'll think as though United States is the only country in the world.
Washington's the only place in the world. Yeah. I used to say that Peter Jennings' show, World News Tonight, and all these programs, used to be mostly Washington Tonight,
Right.
London Tonight maybe, but not enough of the world. But now you're seeing that change, and they're now Indian channels that are out in the world. India produces its own, has always produced its own news, but now you
Like
can watch
WION,
this. Yeah.
There's a new channel in India which is almost like CNN in the context of the
WION, WION it's pronounced, right?
world is one. And the important thing is they have anchors from different parts of the world. Not
In
all
India,
of them
yeah.
Indians. Not all of them Indians.
Yeah.
They do it from Johannesburg, they do it from Paris, London, almost like the CNN. And the focus is on India, of course. But international news, it's become a major channel at the moment.
Well, let's talk about the Houston Chronicle. This is the local paper here. We really believe at our show in supporting local newspapers, and we always say that if anyone's watching from around the country and wants us to come read the paper with you, like we have with the Chicago Sun, and we've also done it with the various other papers, the Washington Post, the Toronto Globe and Mail. We'd love to read the paper with the editors. We did with the Dallas Morning News. We read it with the editor of the Dallas Morning News. So here on the front page is a picture of Danielle and Sonia, who were among the killed last Friday in Cleveland, not Cleveland, Ohio, this is a smaller place, about 45 miles from where we're sitting. And in remembrance, on April 28th, a man stormed a house and gunned down 5 people, including a 9-year-old boy. These are their stories. And they had gone to that man's house and said, "Stop firing your gun." He was firing his gun into the air. He walked over and then killed all the people in the house next door. And this is different, of course, from the terrible story of the mass shooting at a Texas mall, where a man got out of his car and just started shooting at the mall. 8 people dead, at least 7 injured. Just awful to see these stories in America.
All the credit to that policeman who shot him before he could do much more damage.
Yeah.
And in one, he killed him on the spot. Otherwise, many more would have been killed. It was a very brave attempt, and he did that with presence of mind. And the whole world, I think, is praising him for that.
Here is, there's a story about Charles, and it says, "Cheers and protests at Charles's crowning," and we'll talk more about King Charles in a bit. I still call him Prince because that's, when you've been Prince, 52 years of my life, he was only a prince. And here is it's graduation time in the U.S., so we're seeing honors at Rice University, great university nearby here. One of our dear friends' daughters goes there. Stories about Biden hopes strong job market means soft economic landing, because obviously next year is a year for 2 elections, the U.S. and India. It rarely happens that they coincide together because India is on a 5-year cycle typically, and unless the government falls. And here you're seeing the local news, lots of stories about healthcare, which is, and Houston's well known for its healthcare facilities. You can see here's Harris Health. We live this. And if you come here, and there's a health section. Texas has some of the best hospitals in the country. As we know, more women are averting unwanted pregnancies. The whole debate around abortion is, of course, huge in the U.S. COVID dropped to 4th leading cause of death in the United States. This week, the WHO declared the emergency over. Doesn't mean that COVID is over. It's now endemic rather than pandemic is the fear. And 2 of my friends tested positive this week. One of them said, "I didn't know you could still test positive." And they're joking about it, but this is what's happening. See, again, so many medical ads here, and then we buy and sell gold, stories about Taylor Swift, furniture sales. So it's good to see local advertising.
You always see groceries.
Yeah, grocery ads. Yes, exactly. Coupons.
Those coupons.
Yeah, exactly. Here you're looking at Hobby Lobby is a brand that's known in the U.S. mainly because they are run by conservative Christians and had all kinds of things where they want to treat their employees differently from how the government has mandated in terms of the way you treat your employees when it comes to women's health care and domestic partnerships and other things. Texas tax protest, take back control. 7 reasons to protest property taxes in Texas. So Texas doesn't want to pay taxes. Texans don't want to pay taxes, and
Who wants to pay taxes?
yeah, exactly. But the taxes are what paid your salaries, right? So, half of trans non-binary youth considered suicide. Poll finds, and I find in America that the debate is often about athletes and things like that, but it's really a tragic story of young people who are face that kind of situation where they're considering suicide. Half of them, really sad. Commencement speeches. You give a lot of speeches and talks in universities and elsewhere. What is your secret to being such a good public speaker? Everyone I meet tells me how good you are as a public speaker. What has been, and you often speak, it looks like you're speaking extempore, but you've thought about it, right?
Well, 37 years in the Foreign Service. Talking is my business. So, and particularly at the UN, if you're not doing multilateral, you don't make so many speeches. So I came to the United States to have a break from all these speeches, to be with you and the grandchildren. But I have made even more speeches during the last 10 days than ever before. So I may need another break from the speeches when I get back. But it's not going to be. Because there's a lot of demand for exchange, and as you know, the media has become an extremely important part of everybody's life. And people want to know the
Sri, I'll just jump in. I think we lost your audio. Can you test your audio again? I'm not hearing it. Okay, we can check the audience just to make sure. Sri, can you hear me? Yep. I can't hear you. So we got knocked off your audio somehow. I think you might need to log off and log back in. While Sri does that, and maybe unmute on your computer. Let's see if that does it.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go.
Yeah, so I was saying that speaking was my business. I remember playing golf in Kenya with a group of businessmen. And one of them turned to me and asked, "What is your business?" I said, "Mine is talking business." So that is the only thing that we do, the diplomats normally. That's my book is called Words, Words, Words. Words spoken and unspoken. That is why. So it's a come of a second nature to us, and people still want to know what you have experienced. Many places they ask me, tell us about the Foreign Service experience. So I give a lecture on drinks in the Foreign Service, food in the Foreign Service, wives in the Foreign Service. All this generates a certain amount of interest, apart from the fact that I try to analyze global situation from my perspective, from India's perspective. So I have a market, and that's why I do this.
And what are some tips for speakers, public speakers, that you would encourage them to think about?
I wouldn't call myself a model in this. But the important thing is to have something new to say. This is the search that you have to make, because everybody knows many things. And they all remember what they hear for the first time from you. And that is the effort I always make when I speak. Try to find something from my own experience which others will not know. I think that is the key. Because if you study a lot of papers and make speeches, it may not be. But when you have something new to say,
Houston, everybody. I'm Sri here. Hi, and we're going to be looking at the newspapers with my dad, and we are happy to talk about what's going on in the world. And my dad was recently reading articles by Fareed Zakaria, my dear friend, and Ashley Tellis, who wrote about U.S. foreign policy and India. So you wanted to talk a little bit about both their articles.
yes, of course, Fareed Zakaria's article was very positive about India. And he said he was bullish about what's happening in India. And this is true. And the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been saying that India's moment has arrived. And he confirmed that. Of course, he said that such expectations were there even earlier. But then, of course, India did not do as well as it did in the early 90s. But now there is an excitement, unlike in other parts of the world, about what India has done during the pandemic and afterwards, how investments have increased. And he talked about three revolutions in India. One, of course, is the Aadhaar card. Every Indian, the most populous nation in the world, today has a document. In the Soviet Union, they used to say, if you have no document, you are not a human being. That is how they operate. But now all Indians have documents. There was a time when nobody had. In fact, then they talked about documents and cards. They said, where will they keep? Farmer does not have a pocket. What's the point in giving it to him? But now it has become part of life. That was one thing he talked about. Then he talked about the communications revolution, the geo. Of course, he attributed it to Ambani's Jio, but it started even before that. And millions of people in India are accessible, and you will find more mobile phones in India than in the United States. That's the situation. Even the poorest of the poor people have a mobile phone.
And access to cheap data.
Yes.
That's the important thing.
And the attraction of now dealing everything, or financing done through that. So there is less possibility of black money and so on. So it's a major revolution. So such things he says, but of course the problem that he said two things that India has to take care of. One, the minorities should not get the feeling that they are not taken care of, and the women. So inclusivity of women and minorities would make India great. It will make an incredible India. This was his conclusion. It is generally welcomed, but he had these little points about women and minorities, which are a little bit exaggerated. But Ashley Tillers surprised everybody else because he is known to be a friend of India, a champion of India-US relations. But this time he put in a little bit of transactionalism into India's US foreign policy. Because he said that the question is whether India would fight with the United States if there is a crisis in China. I don't think anybody has raised that question like that. We talk about India-US relations, India-China relations. We see it in different contexts. We have a problem with China. We are trying to cope with it. But we are not in the business of any kind of military alliance. But it helps United States to have India as a democracy in Asia, and that impact is very good for the United States as a whole. And our own even military capability is not a threat. It is basically a deterrent. And therefore, this is the way we look at India-US relations. We have relations with the US, but we have a problem with China because we have the longest border and that too volatile border. So we have to take care of that. But we cannot say whether we will fight on the side of the United States if there is. We hope there will be no war. That is how we approach it. But his intention was to point out this and say that India-US relations should be more, what shall we say, transactional, in the sense that what the United States is doing to India today is remarkable. Technology, various other things. And what does the United States get back from it? My point is that it was always transactional in the sense that it was not an ideological relationship with the US. Whatever we have done have benefited the US in a way, and whatever the US is doing has benefited India. That's how we want to look at it. But I think he later clarified in a Brookings discussion. He elaborated on this and made it less pointed than what he had done in his article.
Paulo says hello from Philadelphia. I know you've spent time in Philadelphia. As we hear of different cities, you can mention any memories you have of those places, because you've been to all of those places. We had a question earlier from our friend John Laxmi asking about India and Ukraine and what's going on with that. Can India broker peace in Ukraine?
Yes, that's all that we are interested. We are not interested in condemning a country or joining up with others to, support or oppose things. But India realizes very well what Russia has done is wrong. There is no question of defending Russia. But we have to make sure that we become a bridge between the two groups, because we have good relations with both the countries. And that is what Prime Minister Modi is trying to do. He told Mr. Putin in his face in front of the world's cameras that this is not the era of conflict. This is the era of peace. And Mr. Putin did not contradict it. And that became the spirit of G20, the process which is going on first in Indonesia and now in India. India is playing a very crucial role in trying to bring the two together. But of course, the United States and the NATO countries are not too happy because they think that India is supporting Russia, which we are not. And therefore, we hope, particularly in September when the G20 meets at the head of state level in India, some solution would be found. And I'm sure they are working behind it because the possibility is remote at the moment, so nobody is talking about it. But we are hoping that by the time the G20 meets in September, there will be some kind of a ceasefire and dialogue. That's what India is trying to do. It's true that we have not voted with the others in the UN. We have always abstained. And strangely, China too did the same, and for two different reasons. Because Russia and China have become, partners in a military alliance. But we have good relations with the United States, Europe, and also Russia. And so we think that we have a role which is a peacemaker's role rather than supporting or criticizing anyone.
And you had a unusual opportunity to participate in all of this because these Ukrainian students, Indian students in Ukraine. Tell us about, there were a lot of Indian students studying in Ukraine.
That was a big surprise. Wherever something happens, anywhere, countries which we have not heard of, then suddenly you will find Indian students there. This is not good for India. Why is it that so many students are going to the forsaken places for education? It's of course partly because Indian education itself does not give employment to everybody. Even educated unemployment is a big issue. That is one. Then of course the attractions of developed countries, possibility of working there, getting citizenship, etc. is also a part of India's culture. People have been going and we are comfortable anywhere. So the first time I heard about medical students in Ukraine was in 2014 when there was the Crimea issue. And 30 students from Kerala landed up in my office. I was doing at that time higher education and said, we want medical seats, 30 medical seats because we cannot go back to Ukraine. I said, I cannot produce even one medical seat in India. What can we do? And they finally went back. The situation improved. But this time, 20,000 Indian students, can you imagine, and caught up in so many places in Ukraine. And initially they were very comfortable. They said, no, we are happy. War is not going to affect us. And then in a few days, it became a cry. People were screaming and shouting at us, take us out. And there were all these nuclear shelters and so on. So it was a major success, particularly because of our relations with Russia. We were able to get them all out. Only 2 died in different circumstances, but otherwise getting 20,000 people out of Ukraine. So this has happened before, it has happened in Kuwait. So we say the Indian diaspora is like the British Empire. The sun never sets on it. One corner of the world and Indian will be working.
The joke about about the British, the sun never sets on the British Empire because even God didn't trust them in the dark, and that's why they did that. Here's Pradnya saying apparently a great many IT professionals are leaving Ukraine for Mongolia, leading to a burgeoning sector in Ulaanbaatar.
Absolutely. So you know about Mongolia now that you get letters from there. So, but this was a big crisis, and now you know that we are struggling with getting people out of Sudan. 4,000 people were found there, and not only visitors but also a whole clan of Sudanese from Gujarat. So it's a heavy responsibility. Now we are becoming specialists in repatriating. In fact, we repatriate other nationals also, because we developed some kind of a technology to deal with this issue. And so that is the situation, but we are concerned about the anxiety of every student to go abroad, which is a major issue. And my point is, first we must improve our own education system. But at the same time, we need not block people going out. It's good for us, because we have enough brain, so we don't have to worry about brain drain. I would say it's a brain gain, They go look at the people, Indians have done so well in the United States. Suppose they had not gone away from India. What would have happened to us and to the United States? So this should be encouraged. The Gulf, for example. Indians built all these countries and difficult circumstances. So therefore, we should not block them from going, which is my view. I've been expressing it. But at the same time, they should not be going away because our education is poor or we are not able to give them jobs. With that facility, if they go, it is well and good for those countries and for us.
Yeah, so John says you've coined this. What a nice coinage. The sun never sets on the Indian diaspora. And folks, if you are interested in the diaspora, there's a wonderful organization that I'm part of called In Diaspora that you can find online, In Diaspora. Check it out. And they do wonderful work. There's an unusual story, by the way, in the paper that it turns out that no celebrity speaker is coming to inspire the students at the University of Houston because the school has become so big, no single ceremony can accommodate all of them. So this is a professor at the school complaining that they're not coming to see here. So he has written a speech himself. And this is the opinion section. You love writing opinion pieces yourself. You do a lot of them. You have about 3 columns in different places,
including Khalij Times
in Dubai. Yeah, so out of the UAE. So here's Ukraine downs advanced Russian missile. Is the story here. You have lived in Moscow. What was it like to see that drone hit the Kremlin? What are the implications of that, and why didn't Russia immediately retaliate? Because that could have been a much more deadly attack.
It's not very clear where it came from. So
But
there is no confirmation of that. But of course, it is very great concern. But in fact, this war has exposed the weaknesses of the Russian defense in various ways. Generals have been killed, and that great, march of the soldiers across Ukraine, which people thought that would end up in 3 days. Russia
would be in Kiev. Yeah, that they would be in Kiev,
but it didn't happen. And the bridge towards, a major bridge was exploded. And so it's not that Russia is powerful, but at the same time, in modern war, it is not very easy to just walk over a country or walk through. And the Ukrainians have fought very well. And so that this drone attack is something which proves that nobody is indestructible, nobody is always victorious in war. So
what do you think about Zelensky and what he has done from an actor, comedian to be able to do this? He surprised me. What about you?
Well, in India we had a model called M.G. Ramachandran. What he did was every movie he projected himself as the lover of the people. He was not personally that, but he would not take a role in which he would play a villain of any kind. And so he built up his imaginations image like that everybody thought that he would also be a good ruler. And they elected him as Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. It was a big surprise. And that later Jayalalitha did the same. And therefore the TV image that you create for yourself can be helpful in your political life. And this is exactly what Mr. Zelensky did. He was a comedian. And who would have thought that he would suddenly become the hero of the people? But that is because in every comedy show, he was a friend of the people. And that image, that positive image he created on TV helped him. And then he showed a great courage. Nobody would have expected someone to like him, to even without a fatigue, but in a T-shirt, he is leading a war. So he's admired all over the world for that, even though he should have sought peace rather than war.
But what could he have done? What do you mean sought peace?
Well, he should have sat down. He of course has been saying that he's willing.
Yeah.
But he could be more forthcoming, perhaps, in the peace talks through other countries. India, of course, he has spoken to our Prime Minister also. He has been urging them. And Russia is not in a mood to talk peace. But he also gives the image that he is fighting till the end. He doesn't talk much about peace. He talks about misery in Ukraine. But we shall win is his slogan. And that may not be very helpful for peace, but I'm sure he would be interested more than anybody else to bring this war to an end.
Let's hope that happens. Hi, folks. We're talking about the news with my dad, T.P. Sreenivasan, retired ambassador, and we're in Houston today. And we're going to look at the New York Times a little bit. We're just on screen right now. I'll show you we're sort of browsing through the Houston Chronicle newspaper, and it's so important to have local news. Please support your local newspaper. A lot of us use the New York Times, Washington Post as national newspapers, but local newspapers are so important. Sudha Parekh, Neil's mom, says Zelensky should get the Nobel Prize.
Let him make peace first. For war, you don't get the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, and Samya has put in a link to InDiaspora. Everyone should check it out, indiaspora.org. Thank you, Samya. Samya is our intern. And I'm actually going to have Neil come back on because Neil has to leave. He's never done this. He's always stays for the show, but he has to leave. So he's going to do a couple of announcements, and then we're going to come back to my dad and I are going to carry on.
Yeah. I can stay for a little bit, Sri. I was going to leave closer to 9:30, but if you want me to leave early, I'm more than happy to jump out.
Just wanted you to set the scene.
Absolutely. So just so folks know what we're going to be doing, as Sri mentioned, I will do a few announcements closer to in about 10 minutes or so, and then I will turn over the reins to Sri and his father, and they'll close out the show. We didn't want to. This is such a great conversation. We didn't want to cut it early, despite the ticker you may have seen a few minutes ago. And of course, we still want to talk about Leica Auntie and the memoirs and all the great work she did. I will note, Sri, as you remember, you weren't. I was hosting the show in January, and we offered condolences to your mom, and you heard about it. People reached out to you and said that we talked about it on the show.
That's how they heard about my mom passing. Many people,
unfortunately,
they did hear that. And I'll just say, my mom would watch the show. She, even though she wasn't happy that I was going to be a journalist, she got me a typewriter at the age of 11 and said, "You have to learn how to type." So I learned to touch type earlier than most of my friends whose mothers saw no value in that. So I had a non-electric typewriter, and I learned to type on that. That's how I learned. And she wrote this book mainly on WhatsApp, typing on her phone, and then she would we'd put it into Google Docs and send it back to her. And my dad and brother worked really hard on it and helped get that done and get it out there. So we'll talk more about the book as well in a little bit. But there's so much to see. Yeah.
Before you turn back to the paper, Sri, I would actually like to ask a question of your father, if you don't mind. Sri has often talked about ambassador or uncle, depending on the context. Sri has often talked about his upbringing, the opportunity he had to grow up in many countries, since you had different postings, and that there was great value in that. I'm curious about your perspective. Obviously, you were working, and Auntie was doing her dance, etc. But what was it like for you as a father to be moving from country to country and to bring your children with you? And did you find that same value in giving them that exposure to various cultures?
Absolutely. Of course, foreign service children do not have any continuity in their education, because I did all my school in one place, all my college in one place. And that enables you to win laurels, win medals and things like that. But that opportunity our children do not have, because by the time they are ready for a medal, they move out from there. But if you look at the general education and the performance of foreign service children, it's astonishing how much they have done. In fact, I've been pushing for a book to be produced about foreign service brats, how people, what levels they have reached, and amazing. But our colleagues are a little bit shy about this, because they think that we are boasting too much about our children, so it has not come out. But it would be a good study to know, because of all these circumstances, like when we started in Japan, there was no English education available.
Where Sri was born. Sri was born in Japan.
Yes, he was born in Japan, but so he didn't have to go to school at that time. But all the Indian children were traveling 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers by train to go a little English school somewhere. But that has changed completely. Now the government of India pays for the best school available in any city, whether it is Mozambique or New York. And that has changed the situation. So we don't have to run around looking for schools. The best schools in every city is on our panel. And therefore that has changed very much. and the higher education opportunities. Like Sri wanted to come to Columbia and nowhere else. And as luck would have it, I was posted to the United States in 1992, and he was able to live with us very near Columbia and do his postgraduate degree. So that such opportunities all of us have, and I cannot think of any foreign service child who's not done well. May not be in the traditional sense, but we have wine tasters, we have stocks and bonds experts, so many things, so many people.
We're all lucky that Sri got to go to Columbia.
Yes, and he decided that. I didn't. He said Columbia and nothing else. I would have liked to see him in foreign service, or he sent him to St. Stephen's, where everybody is taking the competitive examination. So, but
Naomi,
he was sneaking into a newspaper in the evening, and we thought that he was studying in college, but actually he was writing columns.
Naomi likes your comment, foreign service brats. That's a great title. And I want to point out Ron Thomas, our friend in Dubai, has already connected with the other Sri in your life, your other son. So they've already connected. And he says that this interview is so awesome. So awesome. So the last thing I want to do is to cut it off. Sri, I'll make the few announcements and then leave it to you and your father.
Please.
So again, just so folks know, we want to always thank and recognize our full production team. You see Sri and I on camera as host and executive producer. Occasionally, I'm the guest host, but you only see Soumya usually in the comments in Facebook. So I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to Soumya for all of her work, providing context, links, additional interaction with folks watching. So thank you, Soumya. We also want to recognize our sponsor, MuckRack. MuckRack has been a long-term sponsor of the New York Times Read Along, and we couldn't do this without you. We absolutely appreciate all of the support that you've given us over the years. And I'll mention, if you remember last month, Brian Stelter was our guest on the show. I met Brian Stelter at a MuckRack reception at South by Southwest. So we'll always be thankful for that. The show, we also want to thank the Local Connection newsletter. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings you the Local Connection newsletter. Each week it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. Ambassador Sreenivasan already offered a pro tip for public speakers. Always have something new to say. Maybe you'll have another pro tip for writers. I know he's the author of numerous books. And finally, I want to remind folks that this show is produced by Digimentors, the consulting firm that Sri set up with his colleague Andrew Lee, and that I'm a VP of events and communications for Digimentors. We do digital marketing, programs such as this, strategic communications, trainings and workshops. We'll be in Atlanta this week doing a training for the Southern Poverty Law Center. We also do staffing and recruiting. I want to mention, so we are going to talk about Lekha's book. There's the cover and a beautiful shot of Ambassador Sreenivasan and his late wife. But in that regard, I do want to mention that we will not have a show next week because of Mother's Day. Sri and I both spend time with our wives on Mother's Day. And I know, Sri, that you'll be thinking about your mom. We'll be thinking about her as well next week. We always make it a point to acknowledge that Mother's Day is not easy for everyone. And of course, this will be your first Mother's Day without her. So we wanted to acknowledge that and let you know we'll be thinking of you.
Let's try that.
Thank you. I will have my mother-in-law with me, so that
your mother-in-law will be there.
My mother-in-law and my two dads are with me in New York, so we will get to be together. But to everyone, hug your mother more than you would have otherwise if you're still lucky to have her in your life, your dad as well. And I didn't tell you this, but one of my students I met at the reunion said to me that after reading all the outpouring of love for my mom, she went and hugged her 93-year-old mother really tight. So that was beautiful. And
Mary
Mary,
Curtis.
yeah. This is an amazing father and son conversation. Loving it. Viewing from Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you so much, Mary. My dad spent time in the Raleigh-Durham area visiting our daughter. But I do want to get to Asheville, North Carolina, because it turns out last year the best restaurant in America was an Indian restaurant in Asheville, North
Really?
Carolina. I have to find out how, why.
I've been there. I have a friend from Asheville, and actually Deborah Kerr, who is a frequent viewer, I believe, is from Asheville.
Yeah.
Unless Fort Lauderdale, I can't.
Yeah.
I'm blanking
Fort
out. But
Lauderdale. But anyway, we should do a exploratory trip to Asheville,
yeah,
North Carolina. As you know, American restaurants, it's always French, American, Italian cuisine is always at the highest level. So for an Indian restaurant, that too in Asheville, North Carolina, to be named number one is kind of shocking, but we'll learn more. Folks,
absolutely.
we're going to let Neil get on with his Sunday, but Salmia is going to stick around for a little bit, and my dad and I are just going to read the New York Times together with all of you. So let's get to that, and then we have our day here in Houston to get to as well. Want to acknowledge to everyone how terrible the news was last night of yet another shooting. And my father started by talking about how he's just so surprised at the American situation with guns and how disappointing it is. And the New York Times National Edition, I don't think the gun story made it here yet, but on the front page is Prince Charles, now King Charles. And you had an opportunity to meet him at least once?
Twice.
Yeah. So where was that and what are the circumstances?
Well, first was in Japan when I was a third secretary, but I lined up to meet him and we talked about it. And he turned to Lekha and asked what it was on her bro. And of course, obviously he knew about it, about the dot on Indian women. But he wanted to have a conversation, so she asked her, and there was a conversation about that. Nothing beyond that. But I was in a country which worships British royalty. Fiji is one country which offered itself to the British Empire, Queen Victoria. They went there and said, please take over our country, as part of your empire. She said, yes, thank you very much, but where is it? She had no idea. And even today, the tradition of worshipping, because they are a feudal society, leaving the Indians apart. The Fijians are very feudal. So they consider the queen the highest feudal monarch, So they, kneeling before them. So this story about a lot of Commonwealth countries lined up to greet the queen. And somebody asked the protocol, what do we do when we actually meet the queen? So he said, do exactly what the person in front of you does. Okay. And Fiji Prime Minister was in front. He went and fell prostrate in front of the queen. And every ambassador was there, they thought they had to do it also. So a new tradition was formed in a democracy doing that kind of thing. So, and when Fiji was expelled from the Commonwealth for different reasons.
For the coup that you lived through.
Yeah, the coup I lived through, that's another story. But what I'm going to say is that the loyalty to the crown is not entirely, in fact, maybe British may not be as loyal as the Fijians are, kind of thing, because it's a moral, it's a emotional link with the royalty. Of course, now people say that now that the Queen is gone, people will be less enthusiastic about the Commonwealth, and also acceptance of the King as the head of state in certain cases. But one thing the British had to be grateful to us for is that India is started the first time for a republic to remain in the Commonwealth. Because as you know, the Commonwealth is a group of countries which are ruled by the British, and therefore most of them are dominions. They had the king as the head of state. And when India became independent, there was this question whether India will continue in the Commonwealth or not. And the rules really did not allow it because it was only for dominion countries. But Pandit Nehru took the decision to have a new category of members, as it were, who will continue in the Commonwealth without recognizing the Queen as the head of state, but only as the head of the Commonwealth. This was historic. And that was what enabled Commonwealth to have now more than 52 countries. And the British are very conscious about this legacy that we have given to the Commonwealth. And India, of course, we are fond of the royal family, not to the extent that Fiji would be, but the linkages with UK are still linkages with the royalty also. And we take interest in what happens, and there is general respect, and the Queen has visited India several times. She was a great heroine. I remember being woken up at 11:30 in a hospital in Trivandrum to speak about it, and then everyone wanted to know more about the Queen at that particular moment. So the interest was really serious.
What about the people who know about the kind of imperial legacy, the colonization, the pain of British rule? And is there a movement for getting reparations from the British? They're trying to get the Kohinoor diamond back? I didn't follow the news, but I thought that she didn't wear. Camilla didn't wear the crown or with the Kohinoor, or did she wear it with the Kohinoor? There was some discussion about that. But what is your sense of it?
In any case, there is a kind of an industry in India these days to criticize the British for what they have done during the colonial days. Because there are awful things were done, like the Jallianwala Bagh murder, mass murder of people, unarmed people were killed in an enclosed area where they could not even run away.
In Punjab, yeah.
Punjab. So things or also what people remind us is repeatedly is India was one of the richest countries when the British arrived, and by the time they left, it became one of the poorest countries. So this makes emotional appeal to the people, and people like Shashi Tharoor have been speaking about this in great detail. But the point to remember is that the law that created independent India, like very many other independent countries, by the British Parliament, stipulate that once this is settled and freedom comes, whatever has happened in the past should not be raised. I mean, not
of course, it helps them. It helps them, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And so some countries have gone to International Court of Justice for compensation for what happened during the colonial days. But it has been ruled out as a possibility. So I don't see that possibility, but unfortunately, this is a common theme in India. Even just before the Queen arrived last time, there was some news about this kind of a propaganda. It's inevitable. It is true also that we are exploited. There's no question about it. But it has to be seen in the context of history. We have also had gains from the British presence in India. So we have to take a balanced view. In any case, all these compensation demands, etc., will not fly in the face of the legislation of the British Parliament.
Naomi says, I have such disdain for the colonizers, yet I am repulsed and fascinated at the same time. Right. And I think a lot of people
That's the
feel
thing about, yeah, exactly. When people all watched the coronation yesterday, India, everyone was watching the coronation. Not because of any particular loyalty to it, but it gave some kind of a pomp and splendor to the world, at great expense perhaps. So in spite of all the shenanigans within the royal family, we forgive them and we accept them as part of history.
We only have about 20 minutes left, so let's just look through the paper. On the front page is King Charles, and then a story about the spy who basically was a airman for the National Guard and revealed a lot of secrets. At the border, officials brace for a new surge. Trump rule expiring. Change could aggravate political tensions and strain resources. And in Texas, this is something they talk about all the time. Sister senators unite to block abortion ban. And braving street battles in Sudan, 2 taxi drivers rescue dozens of stranded people. And create positive energy, a collaboration of the sun and the earth for eco-friendly home designs is in a special section. And let's just go through the paper. More ads for healthcare. One of the things that might surprise some folks watching is that if I told you, oops, let me make sure we put the paper first. There we go. We're going to make the paper bigger. Now that Neil is not here, we're doing this while I'm speaking. But I'll just say that I was so impressed with the healthcare in India. In India, if you have money and connections, the care my mother got, even though she passed in the ICU,
was the best.
Was so good, much better than what you can get in the United States. Again, it's about money and connections. In the US, even with money and connections, you could end up not getting the service you need and the healthcare you need. I'm not saying the American system is worse than India. In some ways it might be, but just in that particular case, that's how I saw it. I see no future. Sherpas abandon jobs they made famous. High risk, low pay, and little safety net in Nepal. Have you been to Nepal and spent time
Yes,
there?
I've been.
Yeah. Ukraine says it hit Russia's most sophisticated missile, and car bombings said to target Russian writer. And Barry Manilow is performing in New York. He must be 97 years old. Actually, I don't know how old he is. Um and more about if you missed the part where my dad talked about Ukraine and India's stance, this show will run immediately on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. As soon as we're off the air, you can watch it again. And by the way, our last among our recent shows was a conversation with Brian Stelter. So if you missed that, you can catch that in all our archives on our website, Digimentors.group. Here's a valley divided over deeper, ever deeper over Israel's future. This is in the Amal River, and ethnic and religious tensions boil over a proposed judicial overhaul, hardening dueling views. And this is so interesting. Tefaf is in New York. And disruptive thinking is an ad in the New York Times, as you know, costs probably $75,000, maybe more. Serbia reckons with gun culture after back-to-back mass shootings. Leader is seeking sweeping changes in Serbia.
The US is not alone.
Yeah, but it's very much the outlier, as we know. And Queen Camilla, Princess Catherine, and clothes of full meaning. And this is what, if anyone knows, please mention in the comments whether she wore the Kohinoor or not, the Indian diamond stolen by the British. These are the two taxi driver heroes. National story. Old man in the mountain gone 20 years still captivates. This is in New Hampshire. And more ads. Oat milk. So you were surprised. You came to our house and you pulled out milk. Only milk. You said there's no milk, and I said there's milk. I kept saying there's milk. There's oat milk, and you said this is not milk. So what is your opinion of the oat milk, soy milk
I've
craze?
already become addicted to it.
Okay.
Because they say it's better than cow's milk.
But you grew up on a farm with a cow and everything
our
else.
own
Yeah.
cows.
Yeah, in India, especially in your time, even my time, lactose intolerance wasn't a thing. Nobody. You were basically
the best thing was
bathing
to
in
drink
milk.
milk
Yeah,
all
you
the
were
time.
just told you're.
Have a glass of milk before you sleep. Now people say that is the reason for all the problems that old people have, because they cannot digest cow's milk.
Yeah. Double parking or littering, while wealthy, may mean higher New York City fines. One of the things that you had was a diplomatic license plate, and you could park anywhere and get tickets and just tear them up, right? What was that like?
We didn't do that, but there are many people who did that, particularly when you have to stop somewhere and go into a meeting. And my car was towed away a couple of times, but they were very polite and friendly, and they returned it without any fine. And that's a great privilege that the diplomats enjoy. But it should not be misused. There are places reserved for diplomats, and if you can use them, there will be no problem. But people go to the nearest fire hydrant, and that is very...
No, of course, they should never park in the fire hydrant.
Exactly.
That'd be absolutely terrible. Can you make the case for the UN today? Why does the UN still matter? I do a lot of work, as you know. I'm so lucky. Digimentors does work around the world with various UN agencies. I just came back from the UN World Data Forum in China. So I'm a big UN fan. I know you are as well. What do you say to people who want to hear more and want to believe in the UN?
Well, the original objective of the UN was to rid the world of the scourge of war. If that was the objective, then it has failed. In the sense there have been 800 wars since 1945. But think of the wars that they prevented, and that there is no account of how many wars have been prevented by the UN. And particularly in the initial years, they were very active. But the current crisis during the pandemic as well as during the war is that they are not able to, they have become completely paralyzed. And the main reason for it is the same old problem of the permanent members, with the veto. Because permanent members were given the responsibility to save the world, and therefore they were given the veto. But once a permanent member himself engages in something that the UN does not approve of, and then what happens?
So why didn't the UN see that? Why didn't the framers of the UN think about that? What if one of us is... I guess the victors to the victors go the spoils, right?
That's right. It's a victors organization. And this was discussed, strangely enough, at one of those constitutional meetings. They said when a permanent member is involved in any kind of incident, then his veto will not be used. For your own sake, you cannot use veto. You can use veto for others. And that was ruled out by the permanent members because they were the ones who were affected by it. That is the problem with the UN, that nothing can be changed in the UN without the support of the permanent members. And there are still so many errors in the constitution, in the charter, because inability of the UN to alter anything in the charter without the agreement of all the 5 permanent members. So during the pandemic, what happened was China prevented even a meeting of the Security Council because of the suspicion aroused in several parts of the world that they were the cause behind it. And therefore, UN could not even hold a meeting. Security Council, and the biggest threat to humanity faces them, could not even hold a meeting. And that is why the whole process was left to the WHO. WHO is only the health agency. But this is a threat to humanity, and the Security Council could do nothing. And a similar situation has arisen now with a permanent member engaged in activities which are not acceptable under the Charter. And they have been merrily vetoing every resolution. But the real spirit of the UN is reflected in General Assembly, not the Security Council. The General Assembly resolutions overwhelmingly approved peace and stoppage of war. But then that is not mandatory. It's only recommendatory. But so that moral force the UN has, and the Secretary General has the conscience of mankind, and the Security Council as the guarantor of peace, all these have an impact. We should not ignore that. There may be exceptions, but exceptions may only prove the rule. But there's certainly scope for the Charter to be amended to do something about veto. Veto has helped many countries, many situations. But when it is being used by the permanent members for their own reasons, and then it becomes meaningless.
I'm looking at the obituaries. I love reading obituaries. And this man is a hero. I didn't realize he existed even. Roy Saltman had warned about the hanging chads in the election process. He said he recommended in 1988 that the use of pre-scored punch card ballots be ended. As you know, in Florida, the reason there was so much confusion was in part this. There was a butterfly ballot, other things. But maybe Al Gore would be president today if it wasn't for this. And Katie Cotton was only 57 when she died. She was VP of Apple, who was in charge of communications. And Apple was a master marketer, but they said very little to the press in advance. And she was the person in part responsible for that way of functioning. And we're looking at the sports section. You're not big into American sports, except golf. You followed, and we bonded over Tiger Woods and his amazing career. Tell us about your love for golf, and how good are you?
Well, I used to be rather good, but not anymore. But golf is a game you can play all your life because there is a handicap situation which puts you on level ground with the champions. I have played with big champions and still managed to play my level of golf. And you don't have to be a superman, you can do it. And as you grow older, you become less strong, but more
crafty. Cunning, more cunning.
And so there is possibility, and this is a game which you can play all your life. There was a story about the king of Nepal asking Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru at a banquet, Mr. Prime Minister, do you play golf? Then he said, no, Your Majesty, I'm only 65. So it was supposed to be an old man's game.
Yeah.
But now young children, look at the Tiger Woods story. At the age of 9, I think.
Oh, 3. No, he started at 3. Yeah, so he was.
At the age of 9, he broke 100. Yeah. I'm still trying to do.
We're just going through the paper here very quickly. The book review is Good Art, Bad People. In Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma, Claire Dederer finds a new urgency in an old question. And I love reading this section. Here's the magazine cover is Kristen Sinema's Last Stand. This is the Arizona senator who's broken up with the Democratic Party, what it means for American politics. She's one of the villains of Washington. A big design issue. New energy, making the sun and earth creative partners in the design of beautiful homes. There's also a magazine that's not from the New York Times, the magazine of the Texas landowner. and it's called The Land Report. Who's hiding on your land?
It's being distributed as part of
Yeah,
New
the New
York
York Times. Yeah, they put that in there as an ad for a design company. Here's a Sunday opinion cover: Why Americans Feel More Pain and Why a Cure Will Require Much More Than Just Medicine. And there's about that healthcare system we've been talking about. They survived Hiroshima nuclear attack. What can they tell us today? And you've been to Hiroshima. What did it teach you about the dangers of nuclear power? You after Fukushima and the accident there and the tsunami, you wrote about all this.
Right. Well, the biggest lesson is use of nuclear weapon is absolutely criminal. There's no question about it. Under no circumstances can you justify a nuclear attack. Of course, historians say if the nuclear bomb was not used in Hiroshima, the Second World War would not have ended, and it would have gone on forever. Like some of the Japanese in the forests still think that Japan is at war with the world. And that ended because of that. But there's no justification. I've seen with my own eyes the hospital in Hiroshima where third generation people are suffering on account of the nuclear fallout. So totally unacceptable and totally painful. But unfortunately, there are still people who justify it, people who believe that it is a deterrent and therefore we should pursue it. But disarmament should be our objective, nuclear disarmament, total nuclear disarmament, if not total disarmament itself. So that is a lesson when you go there, you learn. You don't have to see it to remember it. But when you go there, that broken tower that is still preserved to remind us of that tragedy, it's a totally unacceptable human behavior, and that should not be repeated.
Folks, this is Liz. This is Elizabeth Holmes. I didn't recognize her. She looks different. She's not wearing a black turtleneck, but it says she wants you to forget about Elizabeth as she awaits prison. The convicted Theranos founder has adopted yet another persona, devoted mother, and is on the cover of the business section. And the Sunday Styles cover is about rolling out the red for Hawaii's big event. The hula competition at the annual Marie Monarch Festival is a major draw. He's a prince without a throne. This is Ferdinand Habsburg, the heir apparent to the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. He's in Vienna, and you had a wonderful time in Vienna, right? You
Yes,
lived there?
Absolutely. It's an empire in search of a country, they say. It's such a small country, but it has wielded so much influence in Europe. And even today, Austria is considered, of course, the so-called neutral country, but they have very strong views about nuclear weapons. They have a nuclear reactor which is never opened because they have an allergy to nuclear weapons, and champions of peace. And there are, of course, lot of people in the royalty one could come across, people dressed up as kings coming into parties, because there are lots of people who belong to the royalty. And so Austria was a remarkable experience.
And it's because of its location, right? It's really in Central Europe.
Absolutely.
And that made such a
And
difference.
also the headquarters of several UN agencies. When Kurt Waldheim was the Secretary General, he brought a lot of UN agencies to Vienna. Of course, it turned out to be an issue later. But he is one who was considered even for a third term as Secretary General. So that legacy is also there.
All right. So what we're going to do now in the last few minutes that we have, we're going to talk about my mom and her book that came out. I do want to point out that we had talked about Asheville, North Carolina, and our friend Mary Curtis says that we will, if we get there, she will join us in Asheville, and we can go to that Indian restaurant that was named the number one restaurant in the United States. Not number one Indian restaurant, but number one restaurant in the United States. So that should be fun. Salmia has put in a link to the book. You can find it on Amazon or your favorite independent bookstore, I'm sure. Please take a look. And so this book was my mom's. It's one of her legacies. I, of course, and our grandchildren, everyone. But my mom wanted this book to be published. She wrote it on WhatsApp, one message at a time. She would. This is a kind of a diary, this is about.
Grandchildren made a collection of it.
Yeah,
and that was the inspiration for the book.
Yeah. So,
but this is one thing I wish I did not have to speak about. Yeah. Because the most painful time in my life. But the interesting thing about the book, as I said in my special introduction, because it was posthumous, I said she gave that last 2 years of her life to this book. Whether it has extended his life, her life, or shortened it, I don't know. Because she was so totally engaged in it. To produce the perfect book in terms of facts, in terms of choice of pictures and everything. And it never reached an end of it because that's what she was dedicated to it. There should be no mistake, there should be nothing wrong, etc., etc. And therefore, she couldn't clear it before she passed away. It was almost ready, but she still were checking facts and so on. So we sat together and decided to complete it. It is not as complete as it would have been if she had lived longer, because this only covers about half of her diplomatic life. But this is historic because it's the first time that an Indian diplomat then, of course, we had such diversity. Every 3 years, a new place, new language, new school, new culture, new food is something if you turn back and see that how did you survive all this? But that is the test for a foreign service officer. If after 37, 38 years, you still can stand after having consumed all those swines and consumed all kinds of animals, how do you survive? And that determination is very essential. But we live basically as Indians in our lifestyle abroad. And that's probably gave us some strength and the capacity to adjust ourselves to all this. Of course, Lekha turned an admirer of Clinton just after she met him at the Gandhi statue inauguration in Washington, where the Prime Minister of India was also present. And the very fact that she spoke to him for 43 seconds or 54 seconds turned her from a kind of indifferent person to a kind of admirer, which many people are.
Yeah, so this is that picture. I hope you're able to hear me. I know there was some audio issues before, but here is a picture. This is the picture of her meeting Bill Clinton, and that's the ambassador Naresh Chandra. And this is Bollywood star Shatrughan Sinha, Shotgun Sinha. Here she is with Indira Gandhi. Can you tell us about this photograph?
Yes, this was the first year Foreign Service Day that after we joined. And Mrs. Gandhi came there, and we did not even think that we'll get a chance to even speak to her. But one of the first things she said, I want to see the latest batch of Foreign Service officers and their wives. So then we were sussed out and brought to her, and this is a most memorable picture because all of them have become ambassadors' wives, but they're all so innocent and so overawed by the Prime Minister. And showed it around all the time, published it in newspapers and so on.
And this would have been about 68, 69, yes. 1968, 69. Tell us about Zubin.
This, of course, Zubin was our...
Zubin Mehta, the great conductor. At the age of 28, he was on the cover of Time magazine.
Yes, he came to study medicine in Vienna and turned out to be the most... and the thing about him is he's very much Indian even today. So he was a citizen of Israel. He has lived all his life abroad, but he still carries in his pocket a silver container in which he carries the chilies, the red chilies he grows in his Los Angeles garden. And he produces it when the French have brought him the most delicately balanced food, and he puts these chilies on top of it. And the chef is shocked out of his life. But he made friends with Prime Minister Vajpayee because of this. Because he was seated next to Mr. Vajpayee across the table. But Mr. Vajpayee did not know who he was, and he had no conversation with him. He didn't know who he was. And then suddenly he saw him pulling out these chilies from his pocket. And he was fascinated by it. He said, can I have some of those chilies, he asked. And he said, this is the first time I enjoyed a meal here. And then they became very good friends. And so chilies can also make a difference in your life.
And this is a picture with Sonia Gandhi, who the widow of Rajiv Gandhi and the mother of Rahul Gandhi. She visited in Kenya. And here is Rudy Giuliani before he became so
controversial,
so horrible, such a terrible person.
But at that time, he was the
hero.
famous.
Yeah, he was a hero.
And he was our next door neighbor.
Yeah.
We could spy into his house from our apartment on East River.
And this was a visit with Anderson Cooper, and that's my sister-in-law and my brother, Sharavati and Srikant. And Sharavati was a news anchor in India.
And the only person she wanted to meet in New York was Anderson Cooper.
That's right. And she did get to do that thanks to my former
Thanks to you.
And my mom loved meeting him as well. And tell us about this photograph. Who is in this photograph?
This is with Dr. El Baradei, about whom we talked, my golf partner and great friend.
Nobel laureate.
And the Nobel laureate and one of the best Directors General that IAEA ever had. This is in his own apartment. When you
Vienna,
were there, in Vienna.
This was before selfies. So I took the picture, and there's no picture of me with him because that's my brother. And
carrying your children.
Carrying my children. And my wife and my mother and Mrs. El Baradei is there as well.
It's a delightful picture.
This is 2003, December. I remember it very well.
1 year before.
And this year again, Sonia Gandhi. And these are paintings that my mom did. You can see oil on canvas and embossed work with metal.
Mother Teresa.
Yeah, Mother Teresa.
It's a copy of Imam Hussain.
Yeah, and this is one of, it says here, for my Kerala friends, Malayalam cinema's biggest star, Mohanlal. And my kids, and you can see the joy on my brother's face and my mother's face, my son's face, sorry, and my mother's face. You can
see being in the presence of this great man.
Mohanlal. And then this is a wonderful story. This is the other big star. His name is Mammootty. He came to our house for a shoot
in the 80s.
In the 80s when he wasn't famous, but my mother made sure she got a picture.
He was an extra. He was sitting around and smoking all the time. While we were all seeking autographs from others.
Yeah.
But my mother probably prophesied it, that we took a picture with Mammootty. None of us had that feeling to do it. And this, of course, the great man who was our president, the most iconic president India ever had. And there again, she
Abdul
had
Kalam, and he's known as a rocket man. Tell us why.
Yes, because he was a scientist. Nobody expected him to be president, and it was one of the innovations that Atal Bihari Vajpayee made, to have a Muslim distinguished person as president. And it turned out to be a historic event, because today he is admired and, liked by most people in India, of all the presidents that we had.
And he worked on India's missile system.
Yes, that's what he was. He was a rocket man, head of ISRO.
And there's a beautiful picture also because there's a coconut in his hand and he's drinking coconut water from a coconut.
In Kerala.
In Kerala, yeah, with my mom. And just a few more pictures. This was from Fiji with two or three of India's biggest stars. You see my mom on the right. Above her is Prem Chopra, famous villain. Next to him is Rishi Kapoor. Look how low the shirt is open on his shirt. He is part of the legendary Kapoor clan that used to come and visit us in Moscow, including Raj Kapoor. Look at you with your mustache. And this was one of the other actresses there. And this is the finance minister of Fiji. And
who wanted to come. He invited himself.
And that's Dimple Kabadia, the famous star. This was for a reunion of the movie Bobby from 1976. If you see only one Indian film and you want to understand the song and dance life part of Indian film, that could be one. And this is at my wedding. This is a famous South Indian actress named Padmini, who was my mom's dance teacher in New Jersey. And she was very proud to work with her. And this is an actor from Kerala named Innocent, who just passed away, and with his wife. And you met my mom, and you all met. Where is this?
In a hotel. In
Kerala, yeah.
We just happened to meet him, but we had met him in New York, where he used to come to entertain the Malayalis in the United States. And then later